Shalom, I'm Rain Ben Yehuda, prophetess of Judah. I'm also known as Linda Denise Swain Shepherd. Now today I want to talk about the prophetess Deborah. We have a lot of Habiru Israelites in the United States claiming that Deborah only judged Israel until the battle was over and then handed over power to Barak. That is not true at all. Deborah judged Israel for 60 years, 20 years before the war and 40 years thereafter. Let's go to Judges number 4 and then we'll go straight to number 5. Judges 4:4. Deborah was a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth. She judged Israel at that time. She would sit under the date palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel on Mount Ephraim, and the children of Israel would go up to her for judgment. Now, many people say that she was just a prophetess, but she had no power. That's not correct. Let's go to Judges 4:6. Now she sent and summoned Barak, son of Abinom of Kedesh Naphtali, and said to him, Behold, Elohim, the God of Israel, has commanded, Go and convince the people to go toward Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men from the children of Naphtali and from the children of Zebulun. Now, if she was not in control and with full power, she would not have had the authority to summon Barak. She would have had to invite him to come at his behest. But no, she summoned him. When you say summon, this is not a request that can be ignored. It's one that has to be obeyed. So she commanded him to come and see her, and he had to come along. Now, following the war, which was successful, we read in Deborah's song, and she herself says, Deborah, if you go to Judges 5:7, we'll read in the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Yael, highway travel ceased, and those who travelled on paths went by circuitous roads. They stopped living in unwalled towns in Israel. They stopped until I, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. So a Nebiah, a prophetess, one who is above the priest, the judges, the Kohen Gadol, and all the people. The authority was vested in her because Elohim chose her to stand before him in that generation. And there is no instant in the entire Hebrew scriptures where a prophet or a prophetess ceases to walk with Elohim following a battle or a war. When Elohim has called one to stand before him and represent him in a particular generation, they remain by his side, and only death do they part, quite literally. Now, another thing that these so-called black Hebrew Israelites are doing in the United States is they're causing a lot of divisiveness and dissension by alleging things and making grand statements which they cannot and do not support. For example, they allege that Moab is China. Now, this problem has arisen because in the book of Genesis you have two versions of creation. Let's go to Genesis 1. (1:26) right through to 28. And Elohim said, Let us make man in our image and our likeness. They shall rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and over the animals, the whole earth, and every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created man in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, the bird of the sky, and every living thing that moves on the earth. So here you see in Genesis 1:26 that Elohim has created all mankind, which is all the various nations and races of peoples. Now, the second version of Genesis you'll find in Genesis 2, where you have Elohim creating a man from the dust of the earth, Adam, and from which the line of the Habiru originates, but we have two different creation stories. Now, most scholars, historians, believe that they do believe and they do accept that the Bible is heavily interpolated and definitely was revised. And they attribute the two accounts to the Elohist and to the Yahwist. So you have two different groups of people who wrote these two things. Now, these so-called Black Hebrew Israelites say, oh, the entire Bible, it was written and it was inspired by Elohim and written, therefore, yes, it was, but a very, very long time ago, and certainly before it was revised in the West and the interpolations were added in. So when you're thinking that you have the originally divinely inspired word of Elohim, that's not the case at all today. So we have one version of creation letting us know that Elohim created all the races and nations of peoples, and then you have another version which is the Habiru origination through their patriarch Adam. So it is not correct to state that the Chinese are Moab or the Caucasians are Edom and so on and so forth, because man does not have shared origin and a common history. We simply do not. And if you do know history, you would know that the origins of various races have their various creation legends. All of them, and many of them, are completely diverse, and quite a few of them do not even acknowledge any person called Noah at all. And you'll find that with India, whether you go to South America, to Persia, ancient Greece, I think you'd have Rome, the walls. So you do have very different creation legends from various different peoples. So it's not okay for these so-called Habiru Israelites to come along and just plonk people into their setting and then start labeling them various things. It is obvious that they're very angry. They're Habiru Israelites in the United States. They feel that they're disenfranchised, that other races have come into the country, immigrants that have done better than them in a shorter space of time. But the way forward is not by lambasting these nations. It's actually about looking at ways in which we can improve the lot for ourselves. You simply cannot go around labeling China as Moab. You can't go around labeling the Caucasian races as Edom and trying to fit the whole world into these few races, because it's completely and utterly incorrect. So what I would have is that we start to examine history, because you cannot look at the Bible outside the context of history. That was done in the 14th, 15th century, and what you had was everybody put into this shared and common history. Later on, as historians went out there and archaeologists went up there and started digging up our past, many things did not correspond. Now they could carry on lying and saying, yes, that it's exactly as it states, or they can say, well, actually, we have never come across a nation of this name that was ever mentioned, or we've come across that nation and it's completely different from how it is now purported. So we have to examine history, and we have to examine the Bible in the context of history if we are to be correct. And we cannot just simply go around labeling people, because the fact of the matter is, two people, no matter whether you want to say they were two black people, or whether they were a black and a Caucasian person, or whether they were a black and an Indian person, they simply could not have created all the races. And we have so many diverse peoples and diverse nations on earth. Now, a lot of people will say, well, God can do anything. Yes, he can, but the first of his ways is order, and he doesn't go into the unnatural. In the whole of the Habiru scriptures, you will not find anywhere that a woman gave birth miraculously or mysteriously. She was married or a lone parent. She got pregnant in the usual way and gave birth in the usual way. There is an order to these things. And Elohim doesn't go, they're constant, there's some constant physics that don't vary. because of that order and the way things were set. Let's look at it in Genesis number 1. Let's go to Genesis number 1:14. And Elohim said, let there be luminaries in the firmament of the heavens to separate between the day and the night, and they shall serve as signs and for festivals and for days and for years. Now that has never varied. The sun is there, the moon is there, the days are there, and they don't change. A day doesn't just disappear. So while yes, Elohim can do everything, he does stick to the order of things. So he's not going to have a couple that can produce, like cats, various nations in a litter. It doesn't happen that way. If you have a recessive gene, you will get albinism. If two mixed race people marry and have children, their children will look slightly different, but they will not produce the United Nations, not on their own. And that is something that didn't happen. The story of Adam is the Habiru story of their creation. It's our belief of how we were created. Most of the creation legends do involve a supreme supernatural being that we call Elohim, God, with some differences. With the ancient Egyptians, they believed that the man was the god himself, and then they attributed to themselves certain powers. You see that with the ancient Egyptian god Ra. But yet if you go to the pyramid text, it tells you that Ra became old and he became senile and he dribbled. Well, a real god would not become old, he just could not age, and he certainly would never have become senile. So there, we can conjecture about what was actually going on there in that historical context with the pretense of I'm a god. But what we do have is the majority of nations did believe in a supernatural being, and what you had at the dawn of time was people that there would have been people that didn't know how they came about, and so they thought about it, and it is from these thinkings that they that evolved the idea of a God concept, because they couldn't believe that they themselves could have done these things. And with creation by Elohim, there is an absolute perfect order to things that I don't believe evolution could have brought about. With the Big Bang Theory, you'd have had more accidents in nature, but yet you don't. Every species is by its species, every human is by its tribe or clan, and there is a perfect order to that that definitely indicates intelligence. But when it comes to this shared history, it's an idea of Western civilizations that if we all belonged to a shared history, then there would be less conflicts and wars. That hasn't actually proved to be true, and the converse of that obviously is, what about those people who don't want to share a common history with you and ancestry? You actually go to war against them to compel them so to do. So you have to look at things in their proper perspective, and you actually have to be realistic. You can't sit there thinking, oh, two people produced Chinese, Indians, black people, Caucasian peoples, because they didn't, and it has never been replicated in the history of the world. So I think it's high time that we started to accept that all people were created by Elohim, all peoples were blessed, all peoples were given gifts, and some people became dominant and they stole the gifts of others, and they stole the blessings of others, and in some cases their entire history and their identity. But that does not detract from the fact that God created all the races of people. He blessed them and he said, go forth and multiply. And it is not our goal to be to share our history or even to have a common ancestry, because diversity is good. We don't ask for a common history and a shared ancestry of animals, and we are higher than the animals. So we're happy with animals to be of their various species and kinds. Human beings should be given that same right. Shalom.